Adenike sat in the corner of her room, clutching her school bag tightly, her heart racing. She had never felt this scared before. Every day, she tried to run from it, hiding in her room, staying at school longer than necessary, but it never worked. She couldn't escape the feeling. It had started so simply a few months ago. Adenike's parents were always busy with their business, working long hours to make ends meet. They would leave early in the morning and return late in the evening, usually around 8 p.m. Their hectic schedules meant that Adenike often found herself alone after school. In an attempt to ensure she was well cared for, they trusted Miss Kikelomo, their friendly next door neighbor, to look after Adenike. Miss Kikelomo had always been kind and seemed like a perfect fit, someone who would keep Adenike company while they were working. Miss Kikelomo was kind. She always smiled and gave Adenike little treats. She would tell Adenike stories and sometimes even show her new things on her phone. At first, it seemed like a good idea, someone to keep her company while her parents worked. But now, every time Adenike saw Miss Kikelomo, her stomach twisted into tight knots. It wasn't fun anymore. One day after school, the games they played made her feel sick, scared, and confused. She began doing things that Adenike didn't understand. This new game was totally unlike the ones she played with her friends in school. Adenike was a shy, quiet girl who loved reading books and drawing. She was only 9 years old, but her world was starting to feel very different. At school, she had a few friends, but she didn't talk to them much outside of class. She mostly went straight home, hoping her parents would be there. But most days, they were busy working at their store. It wasn't that they didn't love her, but they didn't have time for anything else. And so, Miss Kikelomo became her new companion. Adenike, you've been so quiet today, Miss Kikelomo would often say. Come here, I have something special to show you. And Adenike, not wanting to seem rude, would follow. Miss Kikelomo had a way of making everything sound exciting, like it was a secret just for the two of them. She would smile almost too sweetly and say, let me show you something, something we can play together. At first, Adenike didn't think much of it. She enjoyed spending time with someone who seemed to care about her, even though her parents couldn't. But as the days passed, the visits became more frequent and the games began to change. One afternoon after school, when Adenike was already feeling uneasy, Miss Kikelomo invited her over to her house again. This time, though, Adenike felt a heaviness in her chest that made it hard to breathe, but she didn't know why. She didn't want to be rude to Miss Kikelomo, so she followed. Inside the house smelled like vanilla candles, and everything seemed calm at first. But then Miss Kikelomo asked her to sit on the couch, patting the seat next to her. Come on, Adenike, let's play, she said, a little too eagerly. Adenike sat down next to her. What game are we playing today? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Miss Kikelomo smiled. A new game, just for you and me. Something special. You're such a good girl, Adenike. I'm proud of you. Adenike didn't understand why Miss Kikelomo was saying these things. The words didn't feel right, but she sat quietly, not sure what to do. Miss Kikelomo's touch, when she guided her hand, felt wrong. She felt uncomfortable, but she didn't know how to make it stop. Every time Adenike tried to pull away, Miss Kikelomo would smile and say, "Don't worry, Adenike, it's just a game, you would like it." But Adenike didn't like it. And as the days passed, it felt more and more like she was trapped in a situation she couldn't escape from. One evening, Adenike came home early from school. She had walked home slowly, dragging her feet, feeling sick and tired. Her parents weren't home yet. As she sat on the couch, she felt a wave of dread. She knew Miss Kikelomo would come by soon. Adenike's stomach turned. She couldn't do it anymore. She had to tell someone. Her parents loved her, but maybe they didn't know what Miss Kikelomo was really doing to her. Maybe they'd understand. She decided she was going to speak up. She would tell her mom. When her mother finally came home, Adenike tried to gather her courage. She walked into the kitchen where her mother was unpacking groceries. "Mom?" Adenike's voice was soft, almost a whisper. Her mother looked up from the counter, slightly distracted. "What's the matter, honey?" Adenike hesitated, taking a deep breath. I I need to tell you something, she began, her voice trembling. "It's about Miss Kikelomo." Her mother raised an eyebrow and quickly cut her off. "What about her? You know she's been so good to you, right?" Adenike swallowed hard, her heart pounding. She she does things to me. I don't like it. I don't want to go to her house anymore." Her mother's face hardened, and she sighed impatiently. "Adenike, don't start. Miss Kikelomo is your neighbor. She's just being kind to you. Don't be so dramatic. I don't have time for this right now." Adenike felt the tears rising, but didn't let them fall. "But mom," her mom turned sharply, clearly frustrated. "Enough, Adenike. We're doing everything we can for you. I'm at work all day, and you know that. Miss Kikelomo is helping us. You're being ungrateful. Go to your room. We'll talk about this later." Adenike's chest tightened. She wanted to scream, to tell her that she was scared, that it wasn't right, but she couldn't. Her mother's words were too loud, too final. She felt dismissed, alone. She turned away, retreating to her room. The door clicked shut behind her, and the weight of her isolation pressed down on her chest. No one cared. No one would believe her. As the weeks went by, Adenike's behavior began to change in ways that were impossible to ignore. She started wetting the bed at night, something she hadn't done in years. At first, it was just an occasional accident, but soon it became a nightly occurrence. Her parents, overwhelmed with their busy schedules, couldn't figure out what was happening. They assumed it was just a phase, something Adenike would outgrow, but their patience wore thin. "Adenike, you're too old for this," her mother would say sharply, her frustration evident as she cleaned up yet another mess. "What's wrong with you? Why can't you control this?" Adenike felt the weight of her mother's words crushing her. She wanted to explain, to say that she was scared, that something was wrong, but the fear of being dismissed again kept her silent. Along with the bedwetting, Adenike became withdrawn, less engaged with her schoolwork, and increasingly absent during breaks at school, preferring to sit alone, lost in her thoughts. The vibrant, chatty girl who once loved to draw and read was slipping away, but to her parents, her decline seemed to come out of nowhere, a mystery they couldn't understand. What they didn't know was that these changes were a direct result of the abuse she was silently enduring. Abuse that had twisted her world into something dark and unrecognizable, leaving her unable to cope with the pain and confusion she couldn't explain. For days, Adenike kept her pain to herself. She isolated herself more, staying in her room, avoiding her parents, avoiding everyone around her. But nothing changed. The games continued. Miss Kikelomo continued to abuse the little one, and she was helpless. No one to talk. At school, Adenike's behavior started to shift. She no longer joined in with her friends at recess, and when the bell rang, she stayed quiet in the corner of the classroom. She couldn't focus on her lessons, her mind always drifting to the things Miss Kikelomo made her do. She felt like she was disappearing, like no one could see her anymore. It wasn't until a few weeks later that Mrs. Olabisi, her teacher, noticed something was wrong. Mrs. Olabisi had been teaching for years and could tell when something was off. She had noticed Adenike's quietness and the change in her demeanor. The once bright, chatty girl had become distant and withdrawn. After class one day, Mrs. Olabisi asked Adenike to stay behind. She was concerned. Adenike, is everything okay? You haven't seemed like yourself lately. If something's bothering you, you know you can tell me. Adenike felt the tears sting her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away, afraid that Mrs. Olabisi would see them. She wasn't ready to speak. Not after what had happened at home, not after the way her parents had brushed her off. She had tried to tell them once more, but they had just told her to stop making things up, to stop being so dramatic. They didn't understand, and that had made her feel so small. So she stayed silent, isolating herself more and more each day. The anxiety at school crept in, but she couldn't let anyone see. She couldn't explain why she was changing, why she couldn't focus in class, why she no longer laughed with her friends, why she would come home early, desperate to avoid Miss Kikelomo. The words came out in a whisper, shaking with fear. I I don't want to go to Miss Kikelomo's house anymore. Mrs. Olabisi's expression changed immediately. She crouched down to Adenike's level. Adenike, you can tell me what happened. No one will hurt you, I promise. The words were so hard to say, but Adenike spoke them anyway. She she touches me. She says it's a game, but it's not. It's not a game. It feels wrong. I'm scared. Mrs. Olabisi's face went pale. She didn't say anything at first, just hugged Adenike tightly. You're so brave, Adenike. You did the right thing by telling me. I'm going to make sure you're safe, okay? The next day, things began to move quickly. Mrs. Olabisi immediately contacted the school counselor and the principal. They acted fast, calling Adenike's parents in for a meeting. When they heard what had been happening, their faces went pale with shock. But Adenike's mother still couldn't fully understand. Are you sure, Adenike? Her mother asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. She stepped closer, her face softening with a mix of confusion and deep concern. Why didn't you tell me earlier, sweetheart? I I should have paid more attention. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Please forgive me. I should have been there for you. Adenike's father was silent, his face a mixture of disbelief and anger. The school authorities took the matter seriously, involving the police. Miss Kikelomo was arrested that afternoon. It wasn't easy for Adenike to hear, but she felt a sense of relief. Miss Kikelomo would never hurt anyone again. In the weeks that followed, Adenike's parents tried to make up for their neglect. They spent more time with her, made sure she felt heard, and apologized for not listening earlier. They began taking small steps to reconnect with their daughter, from nightly family dinners to long conversations about school and friends. The damage had been done, but the healing had begun. It wasn't easy. The bedwetting continued, and some nights Adenike still woke up feeling afraid. But with the support of Mrs. Olabisi and the school counselor, she slowly began to open up more and more. Therapy sessions were hard, but they were helping her feel less alone. She started trusting again, one step at a time. Slowly but surely, Adenike was learning to reclaim her sense of self and her joy. And while her parents could never undo what had happened, they promised to never ignore her again, no matter how busy life got. Adenike knew that they would always listen. The moral of this story is the importance of listening to and believing your children when they speak up about their concerns. It highlights how children, even in the face of fear and confusion, need safe spaces and adults they can trust to protect them. The story also emphasizes the need for vigilance from caregivers and teachers, as changes in a child's behavior, such as isolation, anxiety, or physical symptoms like bedwetting, may be signs of deeper emotional and psychological distress. Parents and adults must be open, empathetic, and proactive in addressing these signs, ensuring that children feel heard and supported. The story shows that speaking up, no matter how difficult, is a powerful first step toward healing, and that no child should have to suffer in silence. Now, over to you, our viewers. What lesson did you take away from this story? In your opinion, what role do teachers and other staff play in identifying signs of distress in children? Have you ever noticed changes in a child's behavior that might indicate they need help? What steps did you take or would you take to offer support? How can we create safe environments where children feel comfortable speaking out about difficult issues they might be facing? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this story, give us a thumbs up, share it with friends and family, and hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching and stay blessed.